The Blood Talons are a young and energetic chapter, formed during the 25th or Bastion founding. Following the ages of apostasy and redemption, the Imperium had enjoyed a period of relative stability and growing confidence in the eternal rule of the Emperor. Sadly, that conviction had begun to wane by late M40. Alien threats were on the rise in every segmentum, and the incidents of chaos incursions and demonic activity were increasing at an alarming rate. In the corridors of power, doubts arose to the Imperium's ability to maintain its supremacy, a fear that Terra's power was entering a period of decline. Thus, the 25th founding was declared to shore up crumbling defenses and guarantee the security of the galaxy. Their declared intent was to build a bastion against the coming darkness. Among the many chapters created in this founding, the gene seed of Sanguinius garnered little favor. Disturbing rumors had begun to spread of instability in the 9th Legion's successors. Reports of the Flesh Tearers and the Blood Drinkers going beyond the pale, and the dark whispers of sacrilegious acts behind closed doors on Baal. Still, the demands on the Imperium were onerous, and reluctantly a single chapter from Sanguinius genes was forged. A chapter that would be granted the name Blood Talons. The new chapter set off in their roaming fleet, tasked to harry Xenos threats and battle traitors in their own dens. At first, the Blood Talons performed admirably, earning a shining reputation for zeal and rigorous discipline, quite at odds with the deteriorating standards of its sibling chapters. For their first entry, training officers from Baal were astonished that not one Blood Talon fell to the Black Rage. Though its curse lay upon them, the young chapter seemed remarkably resistant to its siren call. All that changed in their second century of operation. First one, then a dozen, then scores of brothers succumbed, the Black Rage taking them one by one. It was swiftly noted that all affected brothers were original Blood Talons, not one of them under 100 years old, subjectively speaking. A thorough analysis revealed a damning truth. The Black Rage emerged in ever greater intensity as the brother aged, growing ever more potent till it could be denied no more. Courage and discipline proved no defense against the red thirst. The Blood Talons' fall into madness was not a question of if, but of when. By their third century of operation, no original Blood Talon remained. All either killed in battle or consigned to the Death Company. Even those brothers in dreadnought chassis were helpless to resist, every one of them condemned to become a Furisco model clothed in black. The Blood Talons were forced to accept that the lifespans of their primogenitors was denied to them, that none of their order would mark the passing of 2 centuries. For them, life would be short, burning out in a blaze of glory or lost to raving madness. The Blood Talons accepted their lot with stoic dignity, swearing to seek worthy ends before madness took them. The number of years of a warrior's life did not matter, they told themselves. Only their deaths counted. So, the chapter took off for the darkest corners of the galaxy, seeking the most dangerous and deadly foes to battle. Rarely did they return to the Imperium, seen only when they required resupply and replenishment for their nomadic fleet. They shunned contact with Baal and their successors of Sanguinius, wishing not to be measured against their resplendent sires. The respect of other men, or lack thereof, was of no consequence. Only in the eyes of their brothers could glory be found, and no honor was greater than that of a beautiful death. So 1,000 years passed, with the Blood Talons rarely seen and hardly remarked upon. Then came the fall of Cadia and the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum. The Blood Talons' fleet was unfortunate enough to be gathered in the Vitatum sector, which lay directly in the path of the yawning rift. The brothers did not see the threat until it was too late, waking to the ringing alarms and peals of terror as the warp violated real space, engulfing their fleet in tides of insanity. Battle was given to the floods of Neverborn, an endless torrent of demons clawing at their ships. Infernal claws rent ceramite, hell flames melted hulls, and cavorting demonettes made merry with the mutilated remains of the chapter sir. Bravely did the Blood Talons make their stand, fighting a battle that lasted a mere day and also 1,000 years. Courage and defiance were pitted against mindless rage and depravity only to be found wanting. Frigates burned, strike cruisers were torn apart, and Factorum vessels made into palaces of horror. The great battle barge, Angel's Revenge, simply vanished, never to be seen again. One by one their ships fell, until only their chapter bark, the magnificent Lamentanta, remained. In desperation, Chapter Master Amara ordered his brothers to prepare their souls for death, but even as he did so, the warp convulsed and spat them back into real space. Without warning or explanation, the chapter bark broke free, bursting into the cold embrace of the void, free of demons, though scarcely better off. The survivors found themselves in what was once Segmentum Obscurus, but was now a wasteland of dead worlds. No hubs of authority could be located. No sign of the Imperium command could be found. Only isolated worlds lingered, sending out pleas for aid that went unanswered. Worse, the navigators could find no hint of the Astronomicon, merely a rolling vista of warp storms where once the stars had shone. Only one conclusion could be made. Terra had fallen and the Emperor was dead. The Blood Talons may well be the last Space Marines in the galaxy. Such horror, such despair threatened to take the hearts of the survivors, but Amara was unbowed. He declared the galaxy may have fallen and the Imperium have been destroyed, but one thing yet remained for them. In the ashes of mankind's extinction, the Blood Talons would truly find a worthy ending. Thus, they set sail, determined to find a beautiful death in the ruins of the galaxy. Chapter 2. Homeworld. Since their inception, the Blood Talons have always been a fleet-based chapter, with none of the responsibilities of having a homeworld. They have never claimed rights over any recruiting worlds, preferring to recruit from the orphans of the war zones they engage in across the galaxy. Their main base is the massive chapter bark Lamentanta, which endlessly traverses the galaxy, never lingering in any sector too long. Lamentanta is a truly massive vessel, eclipsing the most doughty of battle barges. Some savants in the Inquisition have even deduced from the chapter's name that it may have been a later attempt to replicate the 9th Legion flagship Tear herself. If this is true, then it must be considered a failure, for the secret arts that wrought the Gloriana-class flagships are now lost to the Imperium. Still, she remains an impressive vessel. Her military power was matched only by her beauty, for she is a glorious rendition of the shipwright's art. Every aspect worked, with golden engravings, splendid colonnades, and inspiring frescoes of the Primarch's life and sacrifice. In her magnificent transepts and beautiful thoroughfares, the Blood Talons trained their recruits and learned of the glorious heritage of Sanguinius. In the wake of the Great Rift, Lamentanta became but a shadow of her former glory. Much of her beauty was befouled by demons and her halls polluted with piles of dead. Lacking shipyards and docks great enough to repair her, large sections of the hull have been sealed off, leaving the piled corpses to lay in frozen tableaus of horror. For years, the chapter limped from warzone to warzone, growing more dilapidated with every conflict. To survive, the Blood Talons took to looting derelicts and burnt out worlds for supplies and parts to keep their ship operational. There was no shortage of graveyards in the darkness of the galaxy, and the chapter soon became adept at stripping hulks of ships and breached orbitals. Few among the Space Marines found honor in such a task, but they knew a dead ship could not convey them to battle, and so lowered themselves to become grave robbers. Even so, such base components could not suffice forever for the Lamentanta. The ship required rare parts and exotic materials few worlds could produce even when the Imperium ruled the stars. Also, the brothers' armor and weapons could not all be forged in crude workshops and demanding skills swiftly passing from memory. The solution was found in the forge world Purgatory. This bleak and inhospitable planet had survived the Great Darkness in splendid isolation, neither lending aid to nor asking for help from other sources. Proud and intransigent, the Forge world endured, rebuffing any attempt to engage them, save on their own terms. Many sought the bounty of Purgatory, and few among them were friends. Faced with rising enemies on all sides, the Overseers declared a contest of arms. On a desolate moon in their system, they would allow all claimants for their output to present their case via a blood-soaked slaughter. To the victor would be given arms and victuals beyond measure, bounty enough to make a rogue trader weep. None could resist so lavish a prize, and the annual contests have seen many rise to glory and many more laid low in the barren wastes. That those who would wage war upon Purgatory instead spend their wrath upon each other did not go unnoticed. It is the Blood Talons' proud boast that they have entered the contest 3 times and emerged victorious each time. From such clashes, they had garnered ship parts, weapons, armor, storm ravens, and the precious jet bikes that have become essential to their operations. As war takes its toll, it is inevitable they will return again soon and seek to prove their mettle. The Angel and the Serpent. For generations, the Blood Talons roamed the dark hinterlands of the Imperium Nihilus, battling traitors and aliens, all the while believing that Terra had fallen and they were the last uncorrupted Space Marines in the galaxy. When they finally encountered another loyal force, shock nearly unmade them. The Amber Vipers, a chapt sent into Imperium Nihilus to find evidence that Dimimar yet endured, were hardly less surprised. The meeting of the 2 breeds of transhuman was tense. The Blood Talons had assumed the impenetrable front of warp storms devouring the stars were an endless ocean of destruction, when in fact they represented a thin barrier separating the galaxy into 2 halves. To learn that half the galaxy still stood, that the Emperor's light had not been extinguished, and that resurgent armies crusaded beyond, shook them to the core. Regnator Aronix worried that the chapter had abandoned their sacred trust with their gene father Sanguinius and his oaths to protect the Emperor's Imperium. Some among the Blood Talons wept salty tears, but others were not so moved. Terra had sent no aid or word for generations, and there was scant hope of it ever coming. What did they owe a distant and uncaring emperor, they asked. A terrible schism threatened to tear the chapter apart, yet more pressing concerns intruded. The hosts of Ragnarok closed on Dimimar, led by the traitorous Skull, self-proclaimed Jarl of the Ending and herald of the Wolf-Time. Faced with a common enemy, the Blood Talons and Amber Vipers joined together to face the hordes of ruin in space. Despite all their courage and bravery, the united loyalists could not hold the line, and a fateful decision was made. Regnator Aronix led his last brothers into a pitched battle, throwing the few remaining Blood Talons at the face of death itself. Skull could not resist such brazen a challenge and met them personally, taking great delight in slaughtering all who stood against him. Yet, too late did he realize he had been tricked. As the Blood Talons engaged the foe's attention, the Amber Vipers closed from behind to unleash their most terrible arsenals. From the gates of perdition, they brought forth a psionic weapon, a nightmarish device from the dark age of technology that should never have been dreamed of. It is said that the Ironics laughed as he and Skull watched death unfold around them, taking the vile traitor and all his armies with them. The war was won, but the aftermath was harrowing. The Blood Talons were all dead. All save one. From the ashes of the battlefield came a single survivor of the Blood Talons, Corinthus Sacrodus, and the last of his kind. Corinthus Sacrodus, and the last of his kind. Salt tears did he weep, that he had failed to die alongside his kin, and he yearned to fall on his sword. Yet the Amber Vipers had one last revelation. Their mission was not only to find Dimimar, but to unearth the secret vaults buried there long ago, hidden by Belisarius Cawl himself, vaults filled with Primaris Marines. The Amber Vipers offered a tithe of Primaris Marines to rebuild the Blood Talons. 1,000 warriors born of their gene sire to restore the chapter to glory. They were fit and eager for battle, well armed and trained, but they lacked any knowledge of the Blood Talons and their traditions. The Primaris needed someone to tell them who they were, to teach them of the legacy they would inherit. Corinthus agreed to take these new brothers in hand. He would teach them who they were and instill in them the virtues they would need to survive. For he was certain that the curse of the blood endured and would rear its head again in time. Chapter 4. Gene Seed. The Blood Talons' gene seed has always been noted for the strongest impression of their Primarch, if anything, to an even greater degree than the progenitor chapter. In them, the beauty and physical perfection of their line is so pronounced that mortals who gaze upon them find it hard to believe they are living beings, and not wondrous statues brought to life. Many of their number bear features eerily similar to Sanguinius himself, and those so fortunate are known as Blessed Sons. Sadly, the candle that burns twice as bright must burn half as long, and the Blood Talons suffer greatly for the boons they receive. A recruit to the chapter can look forward to several decades of perfect beauty and physical magnificence. But as they age, the dark brush of the black rage begins to manifest. As years grind by, an unholy strength and resilience grows in their flesh, accompanied by a terrible madness clawing at their spirits and promising to overwhelm all reason and discipline. By the time they mark the passing of the half-century of service, a Blood Talon will face a daily battle for control, fighting to heed the commands of their officers and not give in to berserker madness in the heat of battle. In time, visions of their possibly the angels Numinous, Red Seraphs, or Charnel Guard. Unfortunately, without access to the sealed archives of Mars, this is impossible to verify. If true, their flawed biology may have resulted from the mass replication of gene seed over many iterations of experimentation, straying further from the original template than ever should have been attempted, and magnifying the flaws contained within. Despite their doom, the Blood Talons fought honorably and well for the Imperium, earning a morbid glory all of their own. Tragically, their burden was to grow even greater with the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum. Exposure to the warp, whether it be minutes or years, risks mutation and corruption. The Blood Talons were no exception, and the touch of chaos was to prove damning. As they fled the Great Rift, they began to understand madness and unholy hunger were no longer the only curses laid upon them. Physical mutation began to take hold, and those afflicted with the Black Rage perverting their flawless beauty into countenances most vile. Subtle at first, nascent horns, sharpened teeth, and clawed fingers, all manifesting with the first touch of the red thirst. As the warrior sinks into the throes of insanity, so too does their body degenerate, becoming a hirsute beast with bat-like wings, horned like a demon and slavering around the jaws, filled with tusks. The later introduction of the Primaris paradigm added decades to the Blood Talons' prospects of escaping the curse, a promise of permanent relief from this blighted existence, but one that proved a hollow boast. No amount of genic tinkering could remove the mark of chaos from their blood, and already the oldest Primaris watch in horror as their brows furrow with the spurs of growing horns, and their lips are cut upon razor fangs. The Blood Talons' damnation was complete, their stasis vault becoming filled with feral monsters who could barely be considered human, known as the Infernae. For the bestious warrior sons of the great angel, there could be no greater shame, and their resolution to die before the black rage takes hold grew ever greater. Better to die a proud and flawless avatar of physical perfection than become a ravenous beast. Better to die courageous and noble than be caged in stasis and herded into battle like a rabid dog of war. Better to die a righteous blood talon than to suffer becoming one of the Infernae. Chapter 5. Sacrodus Corintheus. Among the Blood Talons, the sanguinary priesthood has taken on a dark and sinister role, for it is their duty to detect and contain the Infernae. Always they watch the brothers for the first signs of the Black Rage, and all brothers know the day will come when the grim Sacrodos come to take them away to the dark stasis cells buried in their ship's bowels. It falls to the sanguinary priesthood to inter the Infernae, but also to deploy them in battle. Sleek black cryopods are dispatched at their order, sending vile monsters into the thick of the fray to fight and die. Always it is hoped that the Infernae end their existence in a frenzy of bloodletting, but sometimes they do not. Sometimes the Infernae lay waste to all they find and break out, seeking more killing. In those times, the most dangerous duty imaginable falls to the Sacrodus, to capture and imprison the Infernae once more. Such missions are perilous beyond measure, but they accept these tasks without question. Sacrodus Corintheus has led the priesthood in this grim duty as long as any marine can remember, for he alone is not Primaris. Corinthus is the sole survivor of the firstborn, only one who remembers a time before the Primaris arose. Already he has watched the new paradigm start to succumb to the red thirst and knows that the Blood Talons will never be free of their tainted blood. He strives to pass on the traditions and legacy of the ancestors, determined that the spirit of the chapter will be instilled in the next generation. Yet, Corinthus' time grows short. Approaching his 100th year, he knows his days are numbered and feels his blood burning hotter with every passing day. The hour will come when he too must be taken away to join the Infernae, yet he refuses to seek death in battle, determined to pass on his legacy before he is dragged into the dark forevermore. Chapter 6. Beliefs. The coward dies 1,000 times before the end finds him, but the valiant taste death but once. The dramaturge Shakespeare M2. The Blood Talons live under the shadow of doom, and so their souls are filled with melancholy. Every beat of their hearts brings them closer to either madness or death, and as the years grind by, they long for the latter ever more keenly. Death has become their obsession, their first thought upon waking being of a new way to die, and their last before sleep a vision of posthumous glory. In the halls of the Blood Talons are sung no songs of triumph, no celebrations of victory earned without terrible cost. The only hymnals echoing in their chapels are dirges. The only deeds worth memorializing are death sagas. Their templums are lined with tragic scenes of heroes falling, surrounded by enemies they sent to hell, while brothers memorize the many wounds it took to slay the greatest champions. From the moment of induction, chaplains teach that the highest purpose of the Space Marine is to die in service to the chapter. The greatest glory that they can know, to lay down their lives in noble cause. It is instilled that long lives are not desirable, that to exist as a bright flare of light in the night is the finest way to live. Only by dying in battle can they embrace the spirit of the Primarch Sanguinius, and for those that fail awaits only the cursed madness of the Black Rage, a punishment laid upon those who seek to preserve their own lives in selfish cause. If anything, the chapter's efforts have been too successful. As centuries passed, the initiate's obsession with dying grew out of hand, brothers laying down their lives for less than noble reasons. Bold actions became reckless, bravery became foolhardy stubbornness, tactical skill became mindless charges into the teeth of enemy fire. The Blood Talons were seeking every possible opportunity to martyr themselves, and were succeeding. A Space Marine represents a significant investment in time and resources, to be spent wisely and in no way expendable cannon fodder. For the chapter to survive, a tempering had to be made, a counter to keep the brothers' quest for martyrdom from spiraling out of control. To solve this dilemma, the chaplains introduced twin tiers of accolades, separate from the chain of command. The first was for deeds of selfless bravery, righteous courage, and stalwart protection of the common man, appealing to the noblest aspects of their genefather. A warrior would ascend from initiate to soldier, knight, then crusader, and finally angel. The second was awarded for deeds of destruction, wanton carnage, and slaughter of the foe, the blood-soaked fury of their primogenitor in his most terrible aspect. Titles ranging from vengeance, purgation, wrath, extermination, and finally, death. Any brother, from lowest to highest, could ascend in either, and success in one did not add to or detract from the other. It was entirely possible for warriors to be known as Knights of Death, or Champions of Purgation. Advancement by even one level was considered an epic feat, and many passed their lives bearing the basic honorific, Initiate of Vengeance. For the Blood Talons, the goal was to embrace both aspects of their being and achieve the most exalted rank in both honors. To earn a beautiful death was still their ultimate goal, but not all deaths were equal, and they came to embrace the idea that one must achieve one's full potential before seeking martyrdom. No warrior was more praised than he who died with the title Angel of Death. Chapter 7. Menthus and the Master of Sanctity. In the Blood Talons chapter, there is no figure more beloved and feared than Lord Chaplain Menthus, the fierce warrior preacher leading the brothers with fire and passion. But more than this, he is a figure of hope to the brothers, for it is his burning conviction that the chapter still walks the path of righteousness. He continuously preaches that no matter how dark their souls, the Blood Talons are yet honourable and in accordance with the Emperor's grand design. Yet, behind this veneer of nobility, Menthus hides a secret fear. Created a Primaris, Menthus was horrified by the extent of the Blood Talons' curse. That the firstborn had become debased was harrowing, but the new paradigm suffered too was inexplicable. Questions plagued his knights. How the flaw could have manifested among the Primaris, how their genes could suffer a curse unique to warriors created 9 millennia after their stasis sleep. only one answer could he find. The curse was not genetic, but spiritual. A doom laid upon those who bear the name Blood Talon. If the curse had been imposed upon them by an outside force, perhaps chaos itself or more elusive forces, then it could be lifted. Menthus determined that he would find the root cause of their doom and unmake it. Towards this end, Menthus began seeking many hidden sources of tainted lore, relics, totems, and tomes of dark repute. The risks he is well aware of, yet he will not relent, pursuing the secret origin of the curse he is certain must exist. Across Imperium Nihilus, there are no shortage of infernal horrors, and Menthus covets their secrets, determined to unravel the mystery. If Menthus' self-appointed mission is even possible, remains to be seen. But what is certain is that he imperils his soul and all his brothers with his heretical quest. Whether he brings salvations or the final extinction of his order, only time can tell. Chapter 8. Organization. The Blood Talons are theoretically Codex compliant, with the typical range of specialists customary to a Blood Angel's successor. Officer ranks are present, though carry unusual titles. Their supreme commander is known as a Regnator, and his subordinates as Centurios, while squad leaders are called Regulus. The sanguinary priesthood bears the titles of Sacradus, and is responsible for more of the chapter rites and rituals than is common in other chapters. The offices of Chaplain, Tech Marine, and Librarian became extinct following the fall of Cadia, but since their rebirth as Primaris, new incumbents have been invested. The Blood Talons maintain a range of battle companies, capable of any tactical scenario, though they show a heavy emphasis for ship-to-ship boarding actions and aerial insertion warfare. The end of the Firstborn line meant now their forces consist entirely of new generation warriors. Hopes that this would end the Black Rage proved disappointing, and the chapter maintains a small death company for those who become Infernae. Those unfortunates are kept in stasis when not required and are unleashed only in the direst of circumstances, an eventuality that occurs all too often in the Imperium Nihilus. At face value, the Blood Talons are a conventional Space Marine force, but where they diverge from the norm is in their utilization of mortal assets. In defiance of the Codex Astartes, the Blood Talons maintain a mortal auxilia, consisting of human regiments who fight alongside the Space Marines. Not merely allies, but fully integrated units who operate as a part of the chapter itself and receive hypo-indoctrination as comprehensive as the Astartes. Though not nearly as capable as the Space Marines, these mortals are not treated as cannon fodder or servants, but proud soldiers whose officers are a part of the highest command circles. This heretical circumstance began in the dark aftermath of the Noctis Eterna, when the Blood Talons encountered lost Guardian regiments, lost ship squadrons, and fleeing planetary defense forces. With no higher authority to appeal to, these survivors quickly attached themselves to the wandering chapter, adding their ships to the flotilla or begging for passage into the fleet's holds. As the chapter drifted from warzone to warzone, these various forces had to learn to work together, the divisions between them swiftly eroding until any distinction became hard to find. The Blood Talons maintained to the host. Young aspirants will instead spend their time leading mortal units in combat, acting as a fanatical officer corps. Many aspirants never leave this role, failing the many trials necessary to ascend to the Astartes proper. Such failures in other chapters would be relegated to serf duties, but in the Blood Talons no shame is attached to rejection, instead accepting that their role in the chapter lies elsewhere. This results in a seamless integration of mortal and Space Marine, the officers sharing the same hypno-indoctrination and a fundamental understanding of doctrine and tactical protocol. The end product was a formation similar to the ancient legions, in shape if not in size. A combined force such as this would be unspeakable heresy in the Imperium Sanctus, but in the dark reaches of the Imperium Nihilus, pragmatism always wins out. A scattered and divided force would be swiftly destroyed by the myriad threats that daily besiege mankind, but united with tens of thousands of human comrades in arms, the Blood Talons have managed to hold against the rising darkness. With no Imperial authority left on the far side of the rift to reprimand them, the Blood Talons see no reason not to continue this policy and forge on, leading Space Marines and mortals alike into the fires of war, knowing there is nobody who can tell them otherwise. Chapter 9. Rites of Succession. With such shortened lifespans, it becomes difficult for the Blood Talons to earn the experience necessary to lead warriors into battle. Most chapters are led by veterans of many centuries, grizzled warriors who have bestrode every kind of battlefield imaginable and understand every tactic and stratagem that can possibly exist. Not so the Blood Talons, who cannot build up such a wealth of experience. Oft, when the chapter goes to war, none among their number can claim to have fought such a foe before, and some exotic environments are totally unfamiliar to them. Nowhere is this so pronounced than among their senior leadership. To be a chapter master demands sagacity, wisdom, insight, and shrewd judgment, not least when dealing with fractious allies and treacherous friends, who smile to the face and hide knives behind their backs. Bravery and a strong right arm are not sufficient for the task, and to be led by one who has not faced every foe would spell disaster. For the Blood Talons, there was but one answer. When a new reginator is selected, they must undergo arduous rites and rituals, culminating in the ritual consumption of the previous master's brain. Through the use of the omniphage, the new incumbent can absorb their predecessor's wisdom and insight, gaining an instinctive understanding of the many and varied challenges that present themselves. They cannot simply recall every battle and decision made, but the new leader may find their actions steered by instinct they do not understand, their decisions informed by ancient doctrines they have never learned. Thus, the wisdom of the ages can be preserved and passed down, a legacy that transcends their brief lifespans. This ritual has stood the Blood Talons well, but there is a flaw. Should a reginator fall to the Black Rage before his wisdom can be passed down, then it would be lost forevermore. To consume the brain of an Infernae would instantly send the receiver into the throes of the Black Rage. Thus, for more than any other, it is essential that the reginator dies in glory before succumbing to the curse of his blood. Chapter 10. Combat Doctrine. The Blood Talons have been forced by circumstance to operate almost entirely independently and rarely fight alongside allies. As such, they are the epitome of a fast raiding force, specializing in swift attacks and rapid withdrawals, seeking to avoid meat grinder engagements and defensive actions where possible. They favor airborne assaults and rapid redeployments, maintaining an extensive cadre of storm ravens and drop pods. Alongside these, they have acquired templates for jet-like squadrons and heavy support variants, rare indeed, but they have proven their worth many times in the field of war. The chapter typically operates well beyond any prospect of aid or reinforcement, raiding and harassing hostile Xeno races or raising armies of darkness, and so have learned that speed and surprise are their most vital assets. The Blood Talons favor above all the decapitation strike, launching their full might against an enemy's leadership in one overwhelming assault. Where this is not possible, they make use of their mortal auxilia to fight in pitched battles. The chapter has not the means to fight a war of attrition, and so will expend the lives of their men shrewdly and never waste units on uncertain assaults. It is not expected that the mortals will win outright, but rather that they will draw enemies from fixed positions into set-piece battles, exposing them to vicious assaults from Astartes units dropping in from the heavens. This bait-and-strike stratagem has proven itself many times over, and honour is equally shared between the mortal and the transhuman, both recognizing they need each other. When facing Chaos Marines in battle, the Blood Talons have learned to show no restraint, throwing open their vaults to unleash the Infernae. Led by the Sacrodus, their shock assaults can break the back of even the sternest foe and leave the enemy reeling, vulnerable to a follow-up blow from the Astartes squads and the mechanized companies. Though few will admit it, the ferocity of the Infernae has turned the tide of many wars thought unwinnable, and the Blood Talons know in their bones that they owe a debt to their afflicted kin that they could never repay. Battlecry, Chaplains. Blood brings victory. Brethren, blood is life. Index Astartes, Blood Talons, by Matt Who, 81.